demonstrate a cautionary note about not treating these packages as black boxes where you don't know what it's doing to your data. They tested some ostensibly bogus data, namely Bigfoot data garnered from databases online. But what came out was a remarkably coherent pattern of distribution that was tied to bioclimatic factors that were very similar to distribution for black bear. And to get the editorial published, because one of the authors was an enthusiast, a very proponent of the existence of Bigfoot, actually, a GIS specialist who grew up in Colorado. But he told me on the side, he said, Jeff, you more than anyone should know, if we suggested at all that this data actually suggested the possibility of Sasquatch, it wouldn't have been published. So we had to tongue-in-cheek say that the possible explanation for Sasquatch then was, given the congruence of these sightings with black bear distribution, they were simply misidentified black bears. Anyway, so a rule of thumb I propose to people is you can just simply ask, does the region you're in or you're interested in, does it harbor black bear? Has it ever historically or present, or has the habitat been encroached upon and degraded and population sprawl and so forth enough that it's extirpated the black bear? So they're not everywhere, first of all. And the conditions for fossilization in Idaho, at least northern Idaho, or in those areas where there's dense coniferous forest, historically, those are typically create very acidic conditions, acidic soils. And unless you have a circumstance like in China where the porcupines are dragging the remains, or some concentrators dragging the remains into a more conducive environment, namely a limestone cave, or where there are river sediments, or with enough alkaline environment that it's going to preserve, they're going to vanish. They're going to be gone. They're going to be chewed up. What isn't chewed up is exposed to the environment quickly. The other point is that they probably have only been in North America for geologically a fairly recent period of time. They must have, in either case, whether they were Gigantopithecus or whether they were a paranthropine of some sort, they had to have come from the old world, from Africa, perhaps, Asia, perhaps, or most certainly through Asia. And as was the case with 75% of the mammal species that now inhabit North America, they came from Asia. And they got here from across the Bering Land Bridge, which, contrary to popular conception, was not always an Arctic tundra. There were periods of time, as demonstrated by pollen core samples from the continental shelf, that was a corridor of coniferous forest, even mixed deciduous and coniferous forests that extended from southern China all the way into the southeastern United States, and at times. And so, what a little red panda is, the little raccoon panda. Well, they're part of that community, that faunal community of which Gigantopithecus was a member. Just as an example, well, we have fossils of the little red panda in Washington State and in Alabama. So if a little panda could make its way across the Bering Land Bridge, I'm certain that a giant bipedal ape could as well. So that's where they probably came from. Nice. Now the Paranthropus. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'll cut it there. I'll cut it there so we can make a different
Thank you for the answer.
Super interesting. I just while you were speaking, I pulled a picture of a red panda up, and I'm like, that's also not only cute. The longest traveling, perhaps, but also the cutest animal. Really cute.
Let me just add, see, because people have this notion when they say migrate, they have this image of these little animals packing up their bag or their knapsack and striking off for the horizon with a destination in mind. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this inexorable expansion of a habitat, and then the animals that live in that habitat just naturally spread to fill that habitat, and eventually they spread from one continent to the next. So it's not a I always hate to use the word migration. This is even a problem with hominin evolution. Homo erectus in some books is labeled, the migrating hominin, as if suddenly now their longer limbs and more human-like body proportions. Asia. Well, if you look at the first appearance of Homo erectus in Southeast Asia and its earliest appearance in Africa, they only had to move about 2 miles every generation, not every year, every generation, for them to eventually get into Southeast Asia. I mean, there's no march, there's no exodus, there's no, it goes back to these human evolution narratives that has gotten so much press, this triumphant hominin suddenly has the adaptations to conquer.
I just got excited because you touched on my field for half a second of paleoclimate. Of climate cycles when you naturally not have ice in the where we now have Arctic tundra and
right.
have it, fun things like that. Anyway.
And it wasn't even during the ice ages, it wasn't uniform ice coverage either. There were periods where there could have been pockets in these forest corridors that the creatures found. And I think originally that was, they were coastal, the coastal rainforest, temperate rainforest, I think was their primary habitat. And as they exploited resources like salmon, these major rivers like the Fraser, the Columbia, the Klamath, there are salmon that make it all the way up into Central along those waters. And I think an animal that exploits that kind of resource seasonally would just, follow them inland. And if they're generalized enough, like a black bear, black bear are able to inhabit quite a variety of habitats, but they still seek out the mountains or the forests.
Super. Thank you very much. And I have to ask this because Tuss Beatbox, I didn't get to ask her question in a prior debate. I owe you one, Tuss, and thanks for all your support. Tuss has a question for Dr. Meldrum. Bigfoot is so close to us. Would it be immoral to did encounter it?
Well, sure. We've wrestled with those same ethical questions with the great apes, and there's a huge movement limit the exploitation of great apes for medical research and whatever. And so, yeah, it's going to be a similar scenario. But when people ask, well, what would be the implications if one is discovered? Well, one way to kind of get a good handle on that is just to look back in history. What was the unfolding of our attitudes towards the discovery of, or surrounding the discovery of gorillas? And the impact that had on our view of ourselves, our biological identity and history. And I think it'll just amplify some of those same kinds of discussions, but it's not going to rewrite the textbooks. Like I said, there's a slot right now just sitting there vacant, waiting for someone to discover them or to recognize them. Some would argue they've already been discovered. It's just acknowledge them and put them in that slot. And there's a place, a context for it. You wouldn't have to create anything new, really. Just add a chapter.
Thank you. And then, Erica, sorry.
Oh, no, listen, by all means. I think the next one is from Thomas Stonerland. He asks,